Gets it to LeBron for three for the win. Yes! LeBron James at the buzzer!
Gordon cut through. They go to Barrett. He'll turn and shoot for the win.
Bingo! So, 1986, after the Celtics win the title, Larry Bird hears a knock on his door. It's Bill Walton. His wife tells him Larry's asleep, but Larry hears his voice and comes downstairs. Says, "Hey, Bill, I can't do this tonight." Bill Walton has a bottle of Jack Daniels in his hand, puts it on the kitchen table, says, "I don't even need you. I'll be there in the morning when you wake up." Larry Bird woke up. Bill Walton's there in the morning, and the bottle of Jack Daniels is gone.
I'm about to get mine and it's about time. Call us Grindhouse, everybody in a house grind. I'm just doing me, I ain't trying to outshine. Trying to kill my vibe is how you get outlined.
So this day in NBA history, I'm actually skipping ahead a day to August 18th, 1992, keeping the same theme. Larry Bird announced his retirement after 13 seasons in the NBA. He joined the Celtics management as a special assistant, senior executive vice president to Dave Gavitt afterwards. So what do we think about Larry Bird's career?
I think top 10 guy. I think he can go all the way up to about 8. I know Jules feels different, of course. I think not only that, I think he really solidified it too with an excellent college career, excellent high school career. He had a really good coaching run, and then he was an excellent executive too. So I think he really solidified his whole entire career.
Yeah, to double down on that, I think that he's actually a really, really good basketball mind. I think he gets a little underappreciated for his coaching career, coaching Reggie and those Pacers teams. I just think he's a really good mind for the game, and he helped evolutionize what we look at today when it comes to pace and space.
Yeah. I think he has a 3 or 4 year peak of being the best player in the world. 3 straight MVPs, 4 straight finals, 2 championships, obviously won a championship in his second year. And I think top 10 guy. He's in my top 10 for sure. And I think it's hard for me to get him out.
All right, Jules, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so what's up, guys? This is Jules, Tony, and Hoops. Hoopstorians coming at you again. Today, in a couple minutes, hopefully, FYF Sports, also known as Lamont, is coming in and talking about some NBA myths and misconceptions when it comes to the history of the game of when we evaluate players and what we kind of don't remember or kind of brush underneath the rug when it comes to trying to uplift or taint kind of legacies when we have these conversations. And I find it so interesting that there's a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily bring up. So Hoops, I think when we talk about these players in today, we hold them to such a high esteem, and we try to be as objective and clear as possible. But where do we think that there's some of these misconceptions or these things that we start to brush underneath the rug kind of starts when it comes to evaluating a player like a LeBron or a Kobe or a Kareem that have taints in their career, but people don't necessarily like to bring up?
Yeah, I think with a lot of like LeBron, I think is a kind of the perfect case of that, because I think LeBron should I think unless you're some type of sycophant for another particular player, LeBron should be in your GOAT conversation. But there are points in his career that are pretty ugly. Everybody remembers the 2011 finals, but the 2007 finals weren't good either. But I think with basketball, it's such a player-driven, such a singular athlete-driven type of fandom and viewership, where people want to see LeBron, they want to see Curry, they want to see Kobe, they want to see Jordan, right? And so that they will, in order to elevate their legacies, will ignore, I think, ugly parts of their career. I think Michael Jordan actually, to a lesser extent, because I think his career is pretty close to perfect, but just ignore some of the ugly spots in their careers to try to uplift them as like these titans of the game, these infallible beings. And on the flip side of that, we'll take other players that threaten that player's legacy and try to diminish what they've done. I think in particular, I've seen this trend with Magic Johnson, because there's a lot of people that think Curry should be the greatest point guard of all time, when I don't think he's done quite enough to get there. And Magic Johnson, was, I think, unanimously the best point guard of all time for about 40-ish years. And now I'm seeing different things about him. Well, he can't dribble with his left hand. He can't do this. He had a bad finals in this series or that series, a bad series here, bad series there. Tragic Johnson. Then you bring up 2016 finals. Oh, don't worry about that. Steph Curry was hurt, So I think that's where it comes in, where we try to, when we evaluate people's legacies, you're going to have this really dedicated fan base who will find any excuse they can to sort of brush the ugly parts of their career under the rug.
Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, as someone that's got Bill Russell as the GOAT, the hyper fixation on the 44% field goal percentage, you know what I mean, just really shows that. Doesn't matter that he won the most. It doesn't matter that he's got the 5 MVP. And then because of it, they start then it bleeds into other things, like he's not the best player on the team. You know what I mean? The 5-time MVP isn't the best player on the team. We see it with the LeBron thing, but I also see it other ways too, where we don't focus enough on it. Like we were talking about this earlier today. To me, 2018 LeBron can never be the best version of LeBron, because LeBron quit right before game 1. Game 1's overtime. You just can't be the best version of you. When you're at your toughest part in the season, you get pissy and quit. Just like 06 Kobe. 06 Kobe can never be the best version of Kobe, because he quit, in 06. So that's what I mean. Things like that. And I think people that they hyper focus on these things, they don't even focus on the correct shit. And that's how I feel about it. I think, like I said, LeBron's failures are really magnified way more than they necessarily need to be. At the end of the day, he led you to 4 titles. Very few people can ever say that. And that's really what I focused on. I've never, whenever drafting a player, you don't look at it, you go, how many titles can this guy lead me to? That's how you look. You don't go, how many failures do you think he's going to have? I bet he's going to have 2 titles and 6 failures. You just don't look at it like that. And that's why I've always found like the 4 and 6 argument stupid. 4 is an argument. I don't think 6-0 is better than 4 and 6 based on that. I think 6 is better than 4. Because at the end of the day, if LeBron somehow gets 2 more rings as the best player, which I don't see that happening now, but even if somehow it does, 6 and 6 is better than 6-0. I would rather have 6 gold medals and 6 silver medals than just 6 gold medals. You know what I mean? It's just real simple. It's real. I don't understand people that try to argue how losing more is somehow better. I get that all the time with the Bill Russell pushback, and then I get it with, 6-0. And I don't care. I would take 6 and 6 over 6-0. I just think it's pretty, like Kareem, he wasn't the best player, but if Kareem was the best player on all his title teams, Kareem 6-4 would smash Jordan 6-0. That's how I feel.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And to highlight another point too, even when we talk about the Kobe and Shaq argument, well, Shaq didn't do anything without Kobe. Well, it's like he did, but then the Kobe fans will go straight to those 06 finals where he's averaging, 13, 14 points a game. What is he averaging throughout the most of the playoffs? He's giving you between 18 and 10, 19 and 10, 29. And that's where I find these myths and misconceptions of what people try to highlight and value when we have these type of arguments, because they don't want to talk about the objectivity of a certain player. And it gets me so frustrated because I've seen it a lot lately that going to talking about Kareem for a moment, we all understand that he missed the playoffs in the 1970s, in the midst of the 70s, and people will understand, well, he won 1 title and it took him about 10 years to win his second. And when he goes from the Bucks to the Lakers, and Tony, please correct me, but that was basically truly based off of division wins. And if you were the division winner, you automatically have a bid in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Well,
He would have made the
to this
playoffs
day.
under. He would have made the playoffs under any other format, like going forward. He would have made the playoffs in today's age. He would have been like a 7 or 6 seed. Can I address that comment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stephen
I'll
A.
be back up.
Yeah. So Stephen A. started the whole LeBron certain failures don't count. Maybe at some point he did. I don't know. I don't remember that. I would say Stephen A. is actually the most hypercritical person, him and Skip Bayless, of LeBron. This is prior to the whole fallout of last season with Bronny James and all that. And he does it specifically to prop up Michael Jordan because Michael Jordan texts him and he likes that. Stephen A. is actually literally read text verbatim, word for word on the air from Michael Jordan. And he hung out with him in the box seats of the Super Bowl. If you want to say Nick Wright I think Nick Wright is a better example of someone who will criticize other players like Michael Jordan in service to uplifting LeBron's legacy and evaluating LeBron's legacy. But Stephen A, I don't think saying Stephen A is the one making excuses for LeBron. I don't think is accurate. I think Stephen A is one of the biggest LeBron critics. Even now, maybe earlier in the early 2010s, he was a little bit more sympathetic, but now it's just,
I agree. But to get back on this Kareem thing, is Kareem, like you mentioned, he's getting, if he was in any other division, he's basically making the playoffs. And the context that I hate is that from 75 to 76, when he leaves the Bucks and goes to the Lakers, is that the teams that were basically above him during that time all dropped significantly in wins other than those Detroit Pistons teams. And the Detroit Pistons still make the playoffs, having 34 total wins, led by Bob Lanier. And where I find the miss of the argument is that he's missing the playoffs in his prime. And it's, yes, that is true, but where I find the disingenuous part of it is that it goes to the rules and regulations of that time. And we all can collectively say during that time, Kareem is the best player. So, Tony, where do you think that when it talks about people missing the playoffs in their prime, is that a fair assessment when we add the context behind it? Because I know we talk about context is for losers, but is there some stuff that we need to put into the account of why stuff is happening for certain players in certain eras during the time?
I mean, we can use the context and all, but at the end of the day, like, especially when we're getting to these top 10, discussions, like that's part of the burden of being great. You should be able to drag your fucking team to an A seed, a 4 seed, whatever the bare minimum is. If you are that good, you should be able to drag your team there. And we've seen people that, like 03 Duncan drug a team that had no business winning 60 games. There is no reason why that team should have won 60 fucking games and a title. Hakeem in 94. There's no reason why that team should have won 58 games. The year before that, Rick Barry in 75. That's not a title team. So that's where it comes in. I mean, we can use the context, and at the end of the day, missing your playoffs in your prime, that's way down on the list for me. Once we, like, that's like I don't even know, the 15th point I would make. Because at the end of the day, like, it just all goes back to him. Kareem, you can lead me to 2 rings. You can be the second best player on another, well, at least another, so 82, 85, he's the second best player. And then 87, he's third best. By 88, he's like
probably third best.
But no, by 88, I mean, 88, yeah, Worthy's better than him, Scott's better than him, Green's better than him, Johnson's better than him. So he's at 5th. So at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Like that's really what I care. Like if I could take Kareem's career over someone like Carmelo never missed the playoffs. I'll take Kareem missing the playoffs in his prime, over the heights and the peaks. And that's what I'm saying. So to me, like, that's like the 15th point I would even bring up. to me, it's just really a non-issue at that point, unless it's something very, very comparable, you know what I mean? And then it would go to that.
Hoops, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like you said, the context of it matters. Kareem in 75, he was injured. They went 3-14 without him, right? It was a bad team that he was elevating. He got injured. And then the Lakers, who were already a bad team, had traded for Kareem and gave up, I think, like a promising rookie and another starting caliber player. He improves them by 10 games. They're an above 500 team, barely above 500. And they do, relative to their peers, qualify and become a playoff team. And so they don't miss the playoffs because Kareem is not necessarily good enough. It's because the team isn't good enough. And when you look at the whole of Kareem's run in the 70s, winning the MVP, first of all, after missing the playoffs, and being the best player in the world for 10 consecutive years, arguably 11. I would say in 81, he has a case for being best player in the world as well. I think Julius Erving's MVP that year was more celebratory than it was deserved. So I think you sort of look at the whole of his career and say, I don't really care, right? Whereas if you look at someone, let's say, like, I don't know, Russell Westbrook, for example, right? Who didn't miss the playoffs, but never got out of the first round as the best player on his team, right? And you can look at his career and say, well, I'm looking at the whole of his career, and I'm looking at the times that he was the guy and he couldn't get you out of the first round. I know Kareem can do that, obviously. I know Kareem can drag a team that's not that good to the finals, into the conference finals. I'm sure they lose, but he can get you there, right? And so I think when you look at the whole of someone's career, I think you need to add that context and say, does this outweigh the other stuff? And for guys like Kareem, I would say I don't really care, because I know how great Kareem is and we know what he can do and what he did do. For guys like Russell Westbrook, for example, I would say it's a little different.
And I think that's a fair assessment with Russ too, because we were actually talking about this right before we were here, Tony and myself, is your valuability, I think, is as much as, like, everybody in the media definitely has their projections of what a team can do prior to the league. And some can be right and some can be wrong. But when consensus is mostly that Thunder team, 2017, is basically still a playoff team. Some people had them as a 5th seed, some people have a 7th seed, but around that range. So this misconception rather, of him dragging that team because of the personnel and the production on there, is that it still leaves you being a lower seed in the West, because no one wants to talk about the bottom end teams. The Lakers in 2017 is bad. The Dallas Mavericks in 2017 is not good. The Kings in 2017 isn't good. So you already had bottom feeding teams in the West, but one of the teams specifically that almost every single person that was talking about that wasn't going to make the playoffs was the 2017 Houston Rockets. And where they end up is obviously being a 3rd seed and and basically beating the hell out of that Thunder team. Now, everybody has that misconception because it's like the production of that year is obviously outweighing the prediction. But that goes into the part of the whole argument for Russell Westbrook being valuable. James Harden is arguably more valuable because he's exceeding expectations and he's getting to multiple playoff rounds to a team where no one thought that Ryan Anderson was going to be anything and Eric Gordon wasn't going to be anything much. And he's making them into 15 to 18 point per game scorers, making them 6 men and so on and so forth. So I'm not necessarily saying we have to go by what the media says, but if the collective, group of what we think is this team isn't going to be good more than the other team, that shows to me that that should be at least highlighted more than not.
Can I actually make a point about accolades? So, because I think accolades are often, and I do think the media gets stuff wrong, right? and I think they have sometimes with particular players consistently gotten things wrong. But accolades are important when you're evaluating somebody's career, especially people that we weren't alive to see play, or that most people weren't alive to see play. Because you have to trust, because the media gets some stuff wrong, but they're not like consistently wrong all the time about everything, right? The people that generally vote, the majority of them have an idea of what's going on, have a good idea of what's going on. So when we look at accolades, I think it's really important to have that snapshot in time to say, okay, well, like John Stockton, for example, is a good one. Well, if John Stockton is the 5th greatest point guard of all time, how come he's losing first-team All-NBAs to Penny Hardaway, Gary Payton, and Tim Hardaway, right? Well, how come he's doing that? It's the same thing when we talk about, let's say, like Tim Duncan, right? And the Tim Duncan Kobe thing's one of the things that's been going on. Okay, well, Kobe's always been a better player than Tim Duncan. How come Tim Duncan made All-NBA first team as a rookie and made 4 All-NBA first teams before Kobe could make his first, right? So I think those things are important. How come Steph Curry, if he's the greatest point guard of all time, has only made 4?
Wait. Hoops, just to add on that, Tim Duncan, and that's in the greatest power forward era ever, is when Tim Duncan was doing his damage. Keep going.
Exactly. And Magic Johnson, I think, has made 8 or 9 All-NBA first teams at least, right? And so we got a guy that's been the best point guard in the world for the time he came. We know that now. We know just on the production, but we know that the people that were watching it back then in the 80s thought this guy's at least the top 2 guard in the NBA for 10 straight years. We know that now because of the people that were watching it. And I do trust that the media doesn't get that wrong all of the time about everything. You know, I think typically when we look at All-NBA first teams, even now, if you looked at the All-NBA first team, would you really change any of that? No, I wouldn't. I think the All-NBA first team is exactly the way it should be. I thought the All-NBA first team last year was exactly what it should be. And so I think accolades are really important because I think the media, for the most part, does pay attention for those All-NBA teams, all defensive teams. For major awards, sometimes I do think they do, like, it is narrative driven. I do not think Joel Embiid deserved the MVP. I do not think Russell Westbrook deserved the MVP more than James Harden in 2017, right? And I don't think Derrick Rose deserved the MVP more than Dwight Howard in 2011, right? But generally, when we're looking at the year by year accolades, it's really important, and I think it's critical to evaluate someone's career.
Tony, what do you think about the media-driven accolades and stuff like that? Does that help us or does that hinder us?
I think it can hinder us if you're trying to determine who was the best player necessarily. However, though, I don't think there's really any MVPs that aren't a top 5 player. So you're one of the best players in the league regardless. And I think the narrative, like when we were talking about this earlier, like 2001, there's no argument that Allen Iverson is better than Shaq. I mean, 2001, I don't think Allen Iverson's not that I don't think, I know he's not a better basketball player than Kobe Bryant. His size just limits him. However, though, what he's able to do with the other teams not really shooting, things like that. But if you look at like the win shares, we go back because we were talking about that with MVPs and the actual numbers that back up the win shares. He's not the one leading in win shares. It's their defense. They were a stout defensive team. A guy shooting 28 times a game, shooting 40%, that doesn't lead to wins. It looks really good. It looks really cool that he's the smallest, fastest guy on the court, and he keeps getting put on his ass and he keeps coming. That looks really good. And that gives us that false bravado, because that's another thing in sports. It's an ego bravado type of fucking area. You know what I mean? I'm better than you. Let me show you that I can't be beat, my will, all that. So, so the narrative of the smallest guy on the court, and especially when you factor in the weight, the motherfucker only weighed like 160 pounds. That is insane. You know what I mean? When you think about it, 160 pounds. Just to keep coming and coming and coming. Yeah, we like that. Like me, I was, when they first got drafted, I was a Marbury guy. Allen Iverson's play that year really made me love Allen Iverson. I loved watching Allen Iverson play. It's not efficient. It's not going to lead you to wins. But looking at them as basketball players, Marbury looked like a better player to me. So, with that being said, though, our guest is here.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, how you, man? I do apologize, man. I did not think our staff meeting would last that long, and You know how ADs get, athletic directors get to talking about leadership, and they were rambling and rambling and rambling. But I do apologize. Hopefully, I'm going to have to make it up to you guys on another show.
It's all good.
No, it's all good, Lamont. I appreciate that. But we were just talking about basically some NBA myths and misconceptions when it comes to evaluating the players, and we're kind of diving in and that kind of stuff. And what I wanted to highlight is some stuff that you put out recently for the guests that are watching. Lamont is a known YouTuber. Has a lot of subscribers, and it has multiple platforms. What you put out the other day about Hakeem Olajuwon, I think was really interesting, because to me, as being one of the newer people in the space and trying to learn as much as possible, I do think that that's something to highlight, that a team is, or what is known as a humble guy is being, pressed against with his GM, getting suspended, getting fined, and all this kind of stuff. So kind of not necessarily, maybe not use this as a example of misconceptions when we try to talk about certain players overall, when we talk about their greatness, because I think it gets exasperated a lot.
Yeah, you're right about that. And so, the funniest thing about it is, and one of the reasons why I love doing pieces like that, is a lot of people immediately run to the misconception that, oh, you're trying to tear down, you're trying to make that player or that time frame look less than. And it's actually the opposite. What my point is, in trying to explain a lot of these things, is it's just a level setting. The same things that we try to overly criticize players for today were the same things that were going on back then. It wasn't all peaches and cream. And there's a little bit more context to that Hakeem Olajuwon story. At the end, everything got cleared up and Hakeem Olajuwon was cool. I think the purpose of it was that, look, he was going through these same things just like Kawhi Leonard went through those same things, right? How about we not kill these players today? How about we take it easy? How about we understand that this has existed? Some of the issues that we see has existed in every era of basketball. And it's not always about just saying it never happened back then. You guys are soft in this era. And that's what I try to level set by putting stories out there. I try to let everybody know, this is just what comes with basketball. And it's not something that's just particular to this era. And I think that's the story that a lot of people try to portray when we talk about some of the issues that players today face.
Well, I wanted to bring up, because I watched your video, and I just want to correct it. Kenny Smith went 16-10 without Hakeem, and Hakeem went 36-20. So the Rockets, in fact, were worse when Hakeem missed those games. They went from a 64 win percent to like 61.
Correct. I did notice that after I did it. I think I mentioned it in my comments as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But to emphasize that too, because I was watching you and talking to our buddy Sanders, talking about the Kareem argument, just to touch back on that before, is the misconception of what the rules were during the time period and why he's missing the playoffs, and why do people necessarily tax him without putting the context about, winning. You have to win the division to make this as a playoff team. And then the year after he leaves, they maintain the same amount of wins, but all the teams that are above them drop significantly. So what kind of misconceptions that people believe that they don't try to do their homework? I would say, what would you say their viewpoint is when they try to talk about these kind of players who miss the playoffs in the prime without adding context?
So that's the thing too, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned Hakeem Olajuwon missing the playoffs. It's do you see, and this is why I thought the ring culture conversation was very important, because at the NBA level, I question how much control star players have on winning and losing. And I think we put the onus on winning and losing so much so on the player that we literally blame them for everything. I think obviously the biggest figure of that right now is LeBron James, where I mean he's been tasked with he should have won all 10 of his finals. He should have won the championship in all 10 of his finals. There is no context. Nobody cares about it. And that's it. And I just believe that there's a bigger story to tell. I think there are other powers at play when players win and lose. And just like a lot of people have respect for Hakeem's career, even with a lot of the playoff failures, I believe we should have that same mindset when we talk about players today. And I think that's what's lost. I think that there's a shift. There's been a shift in how we talk about players. I think the players of the past have been mythicized. And I think a lot of their down years and a lot of their bad years, people try to erase that from history or their memories because for the most part, sometimes the tapes and the games and the records are a little bit harder to find. And so people can kind of exacerbate who those players were. And they can skip over gaps of their career where there were failures. And in today's game, we can't do that because everything's on Front Street. Every year, every game missed, every shot missed, every layup missed, everything's right there on Front Street. And so these players today get scrutinized far, far, far more significantly. And I think it's playing a role in why a lot of these players aren't getting their just due when it comes time to rank them.
I got a question for Lamont. So I was talking about this a little bit earlier, but do you think because you were talking about players in the past getting more credit and not saying, oh, they didn't have this back then, they didn't have that back then. It's like they did, but you weren't paying attention. But I'm seeing a reverse trend, especially from younger people, and I want to know your thoughts on it. I feel like people to lionize a current player that they really like are starting to really denigrate players that were in the past, like Oscar Robertson compared to Russell Westbrook, Magic Johnson compared to Steph Curry. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, the funniest part about that is, from my experience on FYF Sports, it's been the exact opposite. It's been and again, it can be different on different platforms, but it's been the older fans that have been trying to convince the younger fans why Russell Westbrook averaging a triple-double was just stat padding. Right? They're the ones that try to convince the younger fans, yeah, it's not that impressive. What Nikola Jokic just did last year, it's not that impressive because the defense is soft or people let him grab rebounds and you know, he stat pads. They try to demean the accomplishments of players today. And what ultimately happens is when these young fans get to looking back through history, well, Oscar did it and that almost put him in the top 10. And you look at what some of the players of the past did, and it's just like, hold on. Oscar had a plethora of first-round exits and playoff letdowns, but he was glorified for what he did statistically. But look how we look at Russell Westbrook, and look at how people are, you know, trying to negate the dominance of Nikola Jokic. I have not seen that come from the young fans. The young fans ultimately. And I said this on Players' Choice a while ago. I said, you guys need to stop telling the young fans to go back and watch, because ultimately what happens when they go back and watch, they are now going to be hypercritical of everything that they see, the same way that you guys are hypercritical of everything that you see when you watch today's game and you give no leeway or no context for failures, letdowns, and things of that nature. And when they start to go back and watch the game in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, they're going to be hypercritical. And you like I say, a lot of times I think older fans start these battles that they really can't win when people go back and watch.
Well, I want to ask you this, because you were talking about, like, you know, like LeBron's supposed to win all 10, and, you know, like I just want to say, tell me what you think on this. So, like, to me, by my eye test, 2015 LeBron is the best LeBron I've ever seen. His team was injured. He kept coming. He found out ways to manipulate the game, still win games, even if his shot wasn't on, even if the help wasn't there. And that's what I look at, too. I look for the production. I look for the mental component. And then, you know, growing up in Phoenix, you know, someone like a Jason Kidd showed me that you can go 3 for 11 with 8 points and be the best player on the court by the way you manipulate the game. I argue this by the eye test. 03 McGrady is a better looking player on the court than anything I ever seen Kobe. Now, overall, is he better than Kobe? I'm not trying to say that. Saying for 1 year, if I was just judging what you can do on the court, I would take 03 McGrady over anything I saw from Kobe. But that guy, he was associated with losing, even though his stats went up in the playoff. You know what I mean? The points went up, every year and all that. They just didn't have the team. So what do you think about like these players where, like the eye test shows that they're great, but they're coming up in losing seasons?
Well, again, that's where I say you trust your eyes and you follow the context. And I think a lot of times the narrative today has been to believe that don't trust your eyes if the player loses. Don't trust your eyes if the team falters in the first round. Right? No, these players are great. As I said before, the factors in winning and losing, there's so many moving pieces on the NBA team. I think it's only fair that we evaluate the talent that we actually see with our eyes, and that's what we judge. Now, if we're talking about all-time rankings, one of the biggest things that I say is, yeah, it's a bit unfair because the guys with the championships, the guys with the MVPs, the guys lucky enough to find themselves in those situations, they're going to be at the top of those lists. But when we're judging these players and we're criticizing them, I just think that they're overly harsh when they start to talk about winning and losing, putting all of the onus of that on one player.
I would agree. And where I start to value some people, because you mentioned a little bit before, I'm definitely one of those young players who starts to be hypercritical. You weren't here, but I'm starting to get a little bit lower on Larry Bird because I am hyper focusing on a lot of stuff. So where do you think the disconnect of people who are young like myself start to try to disingenuously try to evaluate the game from a modern lens and create these myths like magic can't go left or something like that, to where people of the older generation are looking at it and seeing that it's perfectly fine because they have that lens of being able to watch a game during the 1980s, during the 1990s. Where is that disconnect, do you think?
I honestly don't believe there will ever be a connect. And from what I've seen, every generation has been spiteful and negative towards the next era. I mean, we literally saw Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell go on national TV and tell everybody that Jordan's era was soft and that he would be able to go in and dominate Shaquille O'Neal. And, they were serious. And so when I see things like that, it seems like it's a trend that's just not going to stop due to ego, right? A lot of the fans of the 90s, it's just their ego. They don't want to, nobody's going to want to admit that what they see is better. I mean, you'll have a few in between that just admit it. And we've seen people like Bob Cousy come out and just say, these guys are just better. I would never be able to survive. You don't get that type of honesty much now. When you hear ego talking, and basketball is an egotistical sport, the fans are egotistical. They always want what they grew up watching to be the best, and they're just going to stand on it. And they will go to any lengths to keep it that way, whether they lie, whether they mythicize players, whether they manipulate information. They'll do whatever whatever it takes to keep the charade of whoever they have at the top.
So because we're talking about evaluating players and you're talking about how older generations of players are spiteful towards each other. I think LeBron comes in for a lot of abuse from like players from the 90s, like Dennis Rodman saying he couldn't play today, he wouldn't be physical enough, or he's getting flack from people from older generations. And so he goes on and says Giannis would have scored 250 in the 70s, right? A really dumb comment, but I understood why he said it. So when we're evaluating players, you talk a lot about the eye test, right? And how the accolades and the winning, sometimes is unfair. Do you ever take into account what NBA players say about another player or where they should be ranked all time into your evaluation of a player's career?
The unfortunate thing is I don't. And the reason why is this. When I played high school basketball, I was able to go head to head against Eric Gordon. There's nothing that you can tell me that will lead me to believe that Eric Gordon was not a top one or two greatest high school basketball players of all time based on what he was able to do to us because I was on the court with him. I have never seen that impressive of a performance ever in real life until I saw Eric Gordon. And so I think that when you're on the court and when you're in the moment, it's hard to tell players that got brutalized by Kobe Bryant that Kobe ain't the best they've ever seen, because they were on the court getting brutalized. And that's part of it too. So that's why I take a little bit of what the players say and I try to balance it. I try to take a little bit of it and try to edge it up to see, okay, it might be a little bit of glaze because they got, this is who they play with in their era. And I try to look at it from the player perspective, because I was a player and there are players that I might rank a little bit higher just because they torch me.
Right.
Yeah. So what I want to know this is, like, how do you look at this versus like skill versus body athleticism? Like, for example, a lot of people, they're on the Kobe LeBron argument, right? And they argue how much more skilled Kobe Bryant is. And like, I don't even care at that point, because at the end of the day, Kobe's skill didn't catch LeBron's body. The fact that LeBron is taller, he weighs more. When he stretches his arms out, he covers more of the court. When he raises his arms up, he covers more of the court. When he jumps, he covers more of the court. He runs faster, he jumps higher. So whatever the skill gap is, it isn't the body gap. Because like you were talking about players, the best player I've ever played against was Isaiah Ryder. My post defense is legendary. The problem is I'm 5'9". Isaiah Ryder can fuck around with me, and he would all day on the perimeter. But when we went into the post, he had to take me seriously. And I looked like Dale Davis bouncing off of him against Shaq. Because at the end of the day, no matter how great my post defense is, I'm still only 5'9".
That's 1,000% facts. Basketball is, again, it's your innate intangibles. Like, I was telling somebody, and I forgot who I was saying this on my channel. I was like, if you're a coach and a guy walks in the gym who's 6'9", 215 pounds with a 39-inch vertical, and then another guy walks in, but he's 5'11", 150 pounds, but they say he has the it factor, we're all going to take the 6'9" guy, just because basketball just favors guys that are just with the natural ability, like the God-given intangibles that like really other people can't have, and that it just essentially makes you better without even trying at times. This is why we see so many 7-footers who can't even make a free throw, but they are able to stay in the league for years and years and years. So sometimes there are things that you can't control that just make you naturally better. And I agree with LeBron, him being just bigger, stronger, faster naturally is going to put him ahead of a lot of guys. And the smaller you are in the game of basketball, the more skilled you have to be. You have to be skilled. And so I don't knock LeBron. He uses his size and strength well. No need to be playing around with the ball, showcasing skill when you're 6'9", 250. You just run through them and go do what you got to do. That's skill to me.
Yeah. Also, because I believe like these disingenuous and this misconversation has come up to the helm because of what has happened within the past month or two with the whole Kobe versus just everybody argument versus T-Mac. I think now more recently is more Tim Duncan, and people are getting into these arguments. So I believe, and I don't please correct me if I'm wrong. I know for a range, not to talk about your list, but I know that you're lower on Kobe. We're all lower on Kobe. We have him. I think our range will be between like 9 and 11. So when we talk about like people like Kobe and these myths and these stats start to get extremely cherry picked to again uplift these kind of players, most of the people now were able to watch him. So where does this disingenuous argument about the eye test versus what is actually happening, it starts to go? Because in my opinion, as being a Spurs fan, and I don't try to say this biasly, I always thought that Tim Duncan was greater than Kobe Bryant, but Kobe Bryant's eye test would go and lean towards him. So like, talk about that for a second.
Well, yeah, you said it perfectly right there. I mean, the basketball, especially once it became entertainment based, is the guys that are better entertainers are going to get looked at as the better players. And Kobe's game was just more entertaining to watch for the fan's eye. Unfortunately for Kobe, there were a lot of things that happened in his career that impacted what his overall greatness could be. And the things that, to me, make up your overall greatness, especially for an NBA career, are the awards like the MVPs and things of that nature. I think those things significantly hurt. I think that having to play second fiddle behind Shaq, again, is that Kobe's fault? No. But when you take on that role, it does get diminished a little bit. You know, it's harder to count that. It's almost the Scottie Pippen factor. You know, do we give Scottie Pippen the 6-0 credit? No, well, you're the second option. Not really. Do we give Joe Dumars or do we give it to Isaiah Thomas? You know, that's just the unfairness of the game of basketball. That the number one guy will get all the credit. That's how it is in high school. That's how it is in college. It's been like this everywhere in every league, no matter where you go. Doesn't change in NBA. And I just think we just kind of have to accept that. And, you know, that's just how the game is. And I think with Kobe, you know, I've done 2 top 10 lists. One, the most talented. Other one is just the greatest players. When I say greatest players, I'm talking about greatest careers. That means everything you did in your career, everything you mastered. And I try to weigh everything equally. And, you know, a lot of people with Kobe try to use the defensive teams to try to give them a slight nudge up. And I tell people, be cautious. Because if you give Kobe a nudge for his defensive teams, then you got to give Rudy Gobert a nudge for his DPOYs, and you have to give Kevin Garnett a nudge for his defense. Everybody gets a nudge in that category. And then Kobe might be looking at a worse spot than 11, right? If you start giving other people nudges if you overweigh certain categories just to bump Kobe up, that's where I tell people you got to be careful. So I think Kobe falls rightfully so around 9 to 11. I don't know where these arguments came from that put him in the top 3. I've never heard that in my life until he passed. And I just think it's unfortunate that people are playing with kind of Kobe's legacy like that. But, you know, and in reality, from what I see, they're only doing it because they're just trying to find another player to throw at LeBron James. Yeah. They're not doing it in sincerity. And that's the saddest part about it. They're not. That's why I went to a channel and they were talking about Kobe. And every time, you know, every second they were saying, yeah, this is why he should be ranked ahead of LeBron. And I'm saying to y'all, it's like, look, y'all, there's a lot of other people ahead of Kobe. Kareem. I was like, why don't you discuss why he's not ahead of Kareem or some of these other guys? Why is it always LeBron? They're hyper focused on LeBron. It's become toxic. And they are doing a disservice to Kobe's legacy more than anything.
I think that's perfectly said.
Can I ask you about before, and I know we've got to wrap up soon, but I want to ask you about Hakeem Olajuwon. He's somebody I think for some reason in like the online space, when we talk about basketball, I think is getting to be a bit overrated. I think we're going a little overboard. I'm glad that Hakeem Olajuwon's being appreciated more than I think maybe he previously was, but I do think he was always in top 10 conversations. But I see people saying top 5, saying he's better than Shaq because he quote unquote beat him in the finals, even though it's the Rockets beat the Magic. Where do you stand on Hakeem, and why do you think that there's this newfound, I think, lionizing of his career?
I've always been, and I don't want to say I've been low on Hakeem. I just was never impressed with his career. I look at Hakeem as a really good player, but when I look at guys that cracked the top 10, did you impact did you impact or change the game? I don't feel Hakeem ever did that. Some of the things that I use when I rank these guys, Hakeem just does not measure up. And again, I think 90s fans, and I think fans of the 90s especially, they have to try to give the perception that the 90s was more competitive than it actually was. So obviously the only other player that really did significant winning in that time was Hakeem. So you have to, I believe they have to exaggerate it to a little bit to kind of make Jordan's competition look a little bit better, even though they never faced up with one another in the finals. But I don't see what's so impressive about his career. I don't. The 2 championships, like I say, didn't do much for Isaiah Thomas. Don't see why it does much for Hakeem. His defense to me didn't usurp what Bill Russell was known for. I don't think it usurped what Tim Duncan did well. So defensively, it's hard for me to use that as a measuring stick to get you up there. So again, I don't know where it's coming from. Don't know where it's coming from other than to make the 90s look a little bit better.
Well, so I'll say this, and then I want to ask you another thing, what you said, like based on the Hakeem thing. So 95 Akeem is the best player I've ever seen play basketball for one season. 93 Jordan would be the second best. 2000 Shaq would be the third best. With that being said, as far as his defense goes, like 1990, he leads them to number one defense. The team doesn't really have a bunch of solid defenders based on his back. But you look at like what are the impressive things. 95 is by far the most impressive championship of all time. He's the only guy. It's the only team ever to beat four teams on the road with no home court. Only team ever to beat the top four teams in terms of win record. They beat the teams with the first record, second best record, third best, and the fourth best record. Only team ever to beat 455 win teams. And the only team ever to beat an MVP still playing at an All-NBA level every single round. Then when you look at like what he could do against Patrick Ewing in 94, he holds that guy to 18 points on 36% shooting, where he just couldn't break. He's also the most malleable pick and roll defender I've ever seen, where he can hop out and guard the perimeter player as well as guard the post defender. So I would say that is what it is to answer your question. With that being said, I can't get Akeem over 10 in terms of greatness. I think 10th is a great spot for him. I think he's somewhere right around there and all that. What I wanted to ask you, though, and you can touch on that too on a rebuttal if you'd like, but what I want to ask you this too is, why do people think offense only matters with like scoring? Like, for example, I'm someone that's got Russell as the GOAT. I will always lean towards winning. Not only that, I think too the fact that you can lead a dynasty to winning through defense, where every other dynasty we've seen through offense. An offensive player, I think that's more special too. But they focus on him like 15 points a game, 44%. He sucks on offense. I go, dude, he's excellent on fucking offense. He's just not a scorer. He's an awesome offensive rebounder, one of the best ever. He's an awesome screener. He's an awesome passer and playmaker. He's an awesome role guy. He's awesome at everything. I watched the 63 finals recently. And he contributed to 75 out of the 112 points on offense between drawing double teams, initiating the offense, setting screens, offensive rebounds. 75 out of the 112 points came through Bill Russell and all that. So I want to ask you about that. Oh, and then also, too, as far as changing the game goes, I mean, if that's the case, too, if that's like one of your big things, nobody changed it more than George Mikan because he's what led to the shot clock. And there's no been bigger of evolution of basketball than the shot clock, than before the shot clock and after the shot clock.
Quickly about Mike, and I do agree there. And when I did my top 10, that was the one player I can admit I forgot about. And that is crazy. But yeah, when you look into Mike and when you look at his career, especially with the criteria that I have, he actually measures up in all 5 metrics. He should be in my top 10 if I redo it. Not sure where particularly he falls, but with my criteria, he's definitely top 10. Because you are right, he definitely impacted the game a ton. I think what you said with Bill Russell is a good point. And that's where basketball has failed. Because when I go back and I read what John Kundala of the Lakers was saying about Bill Russell, but y'all thought that they feared Jordan. They feared Bill Russell more than Jordan. I promise you that. John Kundala, he said we don't fear the Celtics without Bill Russell. And when I hear another head coach, especially your main rival, basically, and so that's what I have to ask myself, what was he doing? And when I hear other players, there were other players in the league. You know what they said? They said he's the best offensive player on the team. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, why is everybody saying he's the best offensive player on his team? But so there's obviously other things that he's doing for that offense that's making that offense great. Right, there are other things that like obviously being one of the first bigs to lead the fast break. There are things that he was doing that transcended the game, that made that offense dynamic like no other. And so I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's become an entertainment-based game where the guys who defend at a high level will never get true appreciation. Bill Russell will never get his appreciation. It's gotten to the point now where you find a lot of people are putting him outside of the top 10, which is wild. And 3-point guy, his comment. Here's another thing that I don't punish players for. I'm sure Bill Russell could have found a way to add 15 more teams. He would have. Can't control that. I can only judge Bill Russell based on what the league was in his time. I just want
to let you know, for everybody on the panel, what does 3 God value?
When
does he value? You value when these players' parents were fucking. Because if the Russells weren't fucking in the 30s and they were fucking in the 60s, they would not be playing with 8 teams. That is ultimately what you value. is when these players' parents were fucking.
Also, it's hilarious to see a Curry fan, give another player crap about very fortunate circumstances surrounding championships because there's no.
Well, the funny thing about 3-Point God is he's actually not a Curry fan.
Oh,
He
yeah?
actually uses that image to troll LeBron because I guess the narrative now is that Curry saved LeBron in the Olympics.
Right.
So again, these are the types of fans that we have. They will use other players just to throw stones at LeBron. They're not real fans of players. They don't really care about evaluating the game properly. It's just always, who can I use to throw a stone at the player I don't like? And that's all it is. And that's the saddest part about it. That's where a lot of basketball discourse is going.
It's weird energy. It's just
Yep.
It is.
But we're out of time.
It's unfortunate.
I do apologize. I got here late, man. I wish I could have stayed to cook with you guys a lot more because this is definitely an interesting conversation that I would have loved to keep going, man.
No, there's no
We'll get you back,
problem.
so we'll get you
Thank
back
you.
on sometime. So, yeah, sometime. Hey, being that you're in the Phoenix area, you know what I mean? Anytime you want to
Yes,
play
sir.
ball, you can.
Yeah, hey, look, man. I coach over at GCU, man. So look, we could start up the runs. I got the gym available 24 hours a day, so you can just come pull up, man.
Oh,
We get some
yeah,
runs, man.
man, I'm right by ASU. So yeah, we'll have to play.
Okay, yeah, man. Just like I say, man. Just tap in with me on IG or something. I'll give you my contact info, and we get we can get you on the court.
All right, but that's the end for today. Remember to bless the ones who broke you because they're the ones who built you. Jules, give us the outro.
See y'all.
Bye.
Put on a suit, drink water, don't drink and drive. Hey man, call your mother.
It means nothing. It means nothing.
Nah, they lying to you. It's about the money.
Now you're more fluent.